Welcome to this session presented by the IDOE Office of Student Assessment regarding released ISTEP Plus items and scoring notes. Information about how this resource can be used to enhance classroom instruction and more fully prepare your students to respond to open-ended questions in the areas of mathematics, English language arts, science, and social studies will be shared. Objectives to be accomplished during this recording include explaining the purpose of the released items and scoring notes, describing how items are scored and how rubrics are applied, providing examples of student responses or anchor papers for each content area, describing ways these documents can be used to enhance classroom instruction, and providing information on other valuable resources that are available to you. Each year, the Office of Student Assessment works with the ISTEP Plus vendor partner to review all of the different types of responses that students provide to the open-ended items on the ISTEP Plus Part 1 assessment. During this review, several student responses that are typical of each different score achieved by students throughout the state are identified. These papers are then published on the IDOE Office of Student Assessment website, along with the notes on how each point was earned by the responses. These documents can be used by educators when discussing their students' responses with parents and students. Also, these documents provide key insights into how scoring rubrics are applied and how classroom instruction should be tailored to help students learn the most useful ways to respond to open-ended items whenever they are required to do so. Within the released items and scoring notes documents, there are several pieces of helpful information. For each content area, there is a description of the types of questions that appear on the ISTEP Plus Part 1 assessment, a brief description of the scoring rules that are used by the evaluators, a copy of the rubrics that are used to score the test questions, a copy of the released test items from Part 1. Released means the items have been posted to the web and are no longer secure. Therefore, the released test items can be discussed and used with students as future practice items. The anchor papers, or sample student responses, that are used by evaluators to distinguish between score points. The ISTEP Plus Part 1 open-ended questions are released when test results are made available so that parents and teachers can review them alongside students' responses to the test items. The majority of a student's ISTEP Plus score is calculated from the items in Part 2. Since Part 2 items are secure and are not released, they are not included in these documents. Students demonstrate their knowledge and understanding by responding to items that are open-ended, providing written responses in a short answer or essay type format. Students are asked to respond to different item types depending on the content area in which they are working. Mathematics, science, and social studies include CR and ER items. English language arts include CR and WP test questions. The questions on ISTEP Plus Part 1 are scored by evaluators who receive extensive training to ensure that student responses are scored accurately and consistently. Each question is scored according to a rubric or scoring guide. These rubrics clearly define the requirements for each score point, and for ELA and mathematics can be found on the Office of Student Assessment website. A set of student responses representing each of the different score points a student could obtain is selected. These responses, or anchor papers, are used as clear examples of each specific score point. Anchor papers are published on the website as part of the released items and scoring notes for each grade and content area. The ISTEP Plus Part 1 ELA assessment consists of two test question types: constructed response test items and a writing prompt. Each item type has its own scoring method. The ISTEP Plus English Language Arts constructed response rubric is used to score the constructed response items. The ISTEP Plus Writing Applications rubric and ISTEP Plus Grammar and Usage rubric are used to score the writing prompt. In Session 1 of ISTEP Plus English Language Arts, students are asked to respond to 3 constructed response items that are based on a nonfiction or literary passage. The questions shown on this slide are examples of 4th grade and 6th grade constructed response items. Responding to items like these allows students to demonstrate their understanding and reading comprehension of the passage they have read. All of the information students need to answer the questions correctly is contained within the passage, and all responses should be based on information from the text. As you can tell from the rubric shown, these CR items are scored holistically on reading comprehension only. This is an example of an ELA constructed response anchor paper with scoring notes that is provided in the released items and scoring notes document for grade 6. As with this item, each anchor paper shows the score the student earned in the top left corner, the actual response the student provided, and a scoring note that provides an explanation of how the student earned the points he or she received. In Session 2 of ISTEP Plus English Language Arts Assessment, students are asked to read a nonfiction or literary passage and respond to a writing prompt that is based on the passage they have read. Depending on the grade level and the information in the reading passage, students are asked to write an informative, expository, or argumentative or opinion essay. Students are scored on how well they communicate their ideas and on the writing conventions they use in their responses. Students must provide information from the passage within their essays, although reading comprehension is not directly assessed or scored within the writing prompt responses. This is an example of an ELA writing prompt item provided in the released items and scoring notes for grade 5. Each writing prompt is given 2 separate scores. One score is based upon the 6-point writing rubric, and the second score is based upon the 4-point grammar and usage rubric. Both of these rubrics are provided within the released items and scoring notes documents for each grade level of ELA. They are also available on the Office of Student Assessment website. This is an example of an ELA anchor paper or student response and the scoring notes. This essay is written as a response to the writing prompt shown on the previous slide. Each writing prompt anchor paper shows the number of points earned in the top left and is accompanied by scoring notes that provide an explanation of the score points earned. The scoring notes for writing prompt responses are typically found on the page following the student response due to the extensive nature of the scoring notes necessary for each response. As shown in these scoring notes, the student responses to writing prompts are scored holistically. For example, if a student response is clearly a 6 overall, but has a few attributes that would be scored as a 5, then the paper earns a score of 0.6. Writing prompt responses are not scored for handwriting, but responses must be legible in order to be scored. Writing prompt responses are also not scored according to their length. The quality of the writing is what matters for scoring purposes. Essays that are long could be repetitive and rambling and receive relatively low scores, while short, succinct papers that are written with precision would receive higher scores. The ISTEP Plus Part 1 Math Assessment consists of 2 test item types, constructed response and extended response. Each item type has its own scoring method. The constructed response content and process rubric is used to score constructed response items. These items are worth 2 content points and 2 process points. The extended response content and process rubric is used to score the extended response items. These items are worth 3 content points and 3 process points. In ISTEP Plus Math Part 1, students are asked to respond to 3 constructed response items. An example of a math constructed response test item and its rubric are shown on this slide. Each constructed response item addresses more than one standard. One content standard and at least one process standard are assessed. Students earn points for the process standard by demonstrating a thorough understanding of the mathematical process or processes involved in responding to the item. This is why students must show their work. If a student provides only the correct answer on all parts of the problem with no work shown, the response cannot be awarded the process points because the student has not demonstrated the process skills in his or her response. Students earn points for the content standard by arriving at a correct solution or by correctly using the process they chose to solve the problem. As you can see, reviewing this rubric, constructed response mathematics items are scored holistically. This is an example of a student response and its scoring notes, which can be found in the released items and scoring notes documents for Mathematics Grade 4. As shown on this slide, the number of the item on the test and the score points for the content and process the student earned are shown just above each student response. In addition, each response has the accompanying score notes that explain how the student earned his or her score on the item. Extended response items are the same as constructed response items in many ways. Each extended response item also addresses more than one standard, that is, one content standard and at least one process standard. Students respond to one extended response item during the ISTEP Plus Part 1 test administration. Students still earn points for the process standard or standards by demonstrating a thorough understanding of the mathematical process or processes involved in responding to the item and must show their work. Students still earn points for the content standard by arriving at a correct solution or by correctly using the process they chose to solve the problem, and the items are still scored holistically. The major difference between constructed and extended response items is that extended response items require students to demonstrate more in-depth understanding. Also, the number of points possible is 2 points each for content and process on constructed response items and 3 points each for content and process on extended response items. This is an example of a student response and its scoring notes, which can be found in the released items and scoring notes document for Mathematics Grade 8. As shown on this slide, the number of the item on the test and the score points for the content and process the student earned are shown just above each student response. In addition, each response has the accompanying score notes that explain how the student earned his or her score on the item. The ISTEP Plus Part 1 Science Assessment consists of 2 test item types, constructed response and extended response. For science and social studies, the rubrics that are used to score the items are specific to the items with which they are associated. In social studies and science, students' responses are scored on the clearly defined requirements set out in the rubrics. In ISTEP Plus Science Part 1, students are asked to respond to the 3 constructed response items. An example of a Grade 4 Science constructed response test item and its rubric are shown on this slide. As you can see, the rubric requires specific key elements that students must describe or explain in order to earn both points. This is an example of an actual student response and its associated scoring notes for the item shown on the previous slide. This response and its scoring notes can be found in the released items and scoring notes document for Science Grade 4. As you can see, the scoring note explains how the student earned each point for his or her response. Here is an example of a science extended response item. Students respond to one extended response item during the ISTEP Plus Part 1 test administration. As you can see, extended response items typically require students to provide more information and think more deeply than constructed response items. Because extended response items are more extensive in their requirements, their rubrics, such as the one shown here, are also more extensive, and students can earn up to 4 points when responding to this item as opposed to 2 points for a constructed response item. This is an example of a student response and the scoring notes associated with that response for the extended response item we have been viewing in the previous 2 slides. This information can be found in the released items and scoring notes document for Grade 10 Science. As previously noted for the Science constructed response item, The scoring notes explain how the student earned his or her score on this extended response item. The ISTEP Plus Part 1 Social Studies assessment consists of two test item types, constructed response and extended response. For science and social studies, the rubrics that are used to score the items are specific to the items with which they are associated. In social studies and science, student responses are scored on the clearly defined requirements set out in the rubrics. In ISTEP Plus Social Studies Part 1, students are asked to respond to 3 constructed response items. An example of a Grade 5 Social Studies constructed response test item is shown on this slide. An example of a Grade 5 Social Studies constructed response rubric is shown on this slide. As you can see, the rubric requires specific key elements that students must describe or explain in order to earn both points. This is an example of an actual student response and its associated scoring notes for the item shown on the previous 2 slides. This response and its scoring notes can be found in the Released Items and Scoring Notes document for Social Studies Grade 5. As you can see, the scoring note explains how the student earned each point with his or her response. Here is an example of a Social Studies Grade 7 extended response item. Students respond to one extended response item during the ISTEP Plus Part 1 test administration. As you can see, extended response items typically require students to provide more information and think more deeply than constructed response items. Because extended response items are more extensive in their requirements, their rubrics, such as the one shown here, are also more extensive, and students can earn up to 4 points when responding to this type of item as opposed to 2 points for a constructed response item. This is an example of a student response and the scoring notes associated with that response for the extended response item that we have been viewing in the previous 2 slides. This information can be found in the Released Items and Scoring Notes document for Grade 7 Social Studies. As previously noted for the Social Studies constructed response item, the scoring notes explain how the student earned his or her score on this extended response item. There are many ways the Released Items and Scoring Notes document can be used in your classroom. Using English Language Arts and Mathematics rubrics to grade open-ended items on classroom assignments and assessments has many benefits. Your students will become familiar with the expectations for the responses to open-ended items. You will be able to model correct responses and explain why one response can earn more or fewer points than another. If students practice open-ended items and are graded the same way all year long, they will not be worried when they see open-ended items on ISTEP Plus. You are assured that you are properly preparing your students for ISTEP Plus Part 1 because you are using the same grading philosophy with your students that will be applied when they respond to the ISTEP Plus Part 1 items. You can also use the instructional and assessment guidance and assessment vocabulary documents in conjunction with the released items and scoring notes to create open-ended items for all content areas. Because science and social studies use item-specific rubrics, becoming familiar with the rubrics in the released items will help you develop appropriate rubrics for the open-ended items you create for your classroom in these content areas. In addition, working with open-ended items throughout the year will help your students learn how to respond to these types of items in a way that best demonstrates their knowledge and skills. All of these documents mentioned here can be found on the IDOE Office of Student Assessment website. This slide contains links to web pages containing many assessment-related resources. The College and Career Readiness team provides Teacher's Toolbox, a free newsletter designed to support Indiana educators within their specific content areas. It also provides a wide array of relevant information ranging from assessment information to upcoming professional development opportunities. Teachers should already be receiving this monthly Teacher's Toolbox newsletter. If you are not receiving this wonderful resource, you may visit www.doe.in.gov/CCR teachers-toolbox for more information. Staff in the Office of College and Career Readiness are happy to provide educators with resources by content area as well. The resources on the College and Career Readiness web pages are also available to parents who would like to help their children in the learning process. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.